Hello, my witches and wizards. This is Professor Rowan. I'm coming to you today to read to you more Harry Potter fanfic. We have been reading Harry Potter and the Natural 20, and we are on chapter 29? Yeah, we're on 29 because we read 26, 27, and 28 last time because they were smaller chapters. We have only left 29, 30, 31, 32, and the epilogue. So if they're short, I don't think we're going to be able to get through all tonight, even if they are short. But we should be able to get most of the way through. I don't want to get to the end, but I'm thinking hopefully chapter 30 through chapter 30, at least. So that we can then do, that's Checkmate Mate and Troll Wanted Dead or Alive. So that next time we can do The Man with Two Faces, The Double Denouement, and the epilogue. When last we left our intrepid explorers, Harry had been convinced by Quirrell that Milo was on his deathbed and that there was nothing that they could do. So Harry suggested that they needed to go find the Philosopher's Stone, and the two of them ran off. And when Milo returned from fighting Lucius Malfoy, he realized what was going on, went to Dumbledore's office, but there was no Dumbledore, because when you need an NPC, they're never there. So, his argument was just on that one. And so he grabbed himself some Hermione and some Ron, and I believe Hannah is with them as well. So Milo grabbed Hermione, Hannah, and Ron and have, gathered the party, as you will, and have gone off to get to the stone themselves. In the very last room that we left off, they had been fighting the Devil's Snare, and the conversation of just how complicated the grappling rules are within the D&D universe came up, but thankfully they were able to get through it by Hermione's quick thinking. Or remembering, because Milo didn't move at all in terror, and she realized, hey, he's not getting attacked. It was a thing. Anyway, so now we are past that and headed deeper into the dungeon. Chapter 29. Checkmate, mate. Well, crap, Milo muttered. That right there is a hell of a lot of keys. There were thousands of tiny golden, silver, and brass keys fluttering about the chamber, somewhat reminiscent of golden snitches, if the semi-sentient sporting equipment were somehow integral to solving the plot and defeating a powerful dark wizard. Psh. So what? Ron mused. We have to find the right one? That's like looking for a key in a stack of keys. Moving keys. Blimey, this'll take the rest of our lives. Assuming we could even grab them, Hermione added. They're pretty high up there. Or, I could save a lot of us a lifetime of searching and just Alamahora the lock. Brilliant! Ron exclaimed. Hermione raised her wand and aimed it at the door, but stopped abruptly. Unless, of course, someone wants to interrupt my spell to vent his or her paranoid delusions about how the door is clearly trapped, she said to no one in particular. Milo felt his cheeks growing hot. Or some crackpot surreptitious theory about Dumbledore's real secret plan? Just open the damn door, Hermione, Milo growled. There's no sensible reason that, if they had a charm or whatever that could stop Alamahora, that they'd use it here and not on the first door. Clearly, it slipped the vaunted brain of our brilliant headmaster that Flickwick was handing out magical lockpicks to 11-year-olds. Very well, if you insist. Alamahora! Nothing happened. Hermione frowned. Alamahora! Isn't it Alohomora? Ron teased. Oh, shut up, Ron. Anyone have another idea? My Merlin-like powers of deduction suggest we try to find the key, said Ron. Or maybe Milo can use some kind of hitherto unforeseen door-opening spell? I could always fly up there, Milo mused, but I wouldn't even know where to begin to find the right key, much less actually catch it. Besides, I need to preserve my magic for the BBEG, the big bad for the endgame. Stands to reason we should be able to get through without resorting to that, he said. Quirrell and Harry obviously managed to get through here, right? They only had wanded magic. Good name, Hermione said idly. Her forehead was creased with thought, staring at the keys. Thanks, I figured some sort of definition was necessary. Ron, take a look around the room and see if you can find anything helpful. A clue, maybe a piece of equipment. Right, he said, and started wandering around the labyrinthine room. Thick, heavy pillars broke up sightlines at irregular intervals, necessitating a manual search of the room. Hermione, I need you to make a knowledge check. Pardon? She said. Just sit and think about the room you're in. Does anything about this ring any bells? Do flying keys appear prominently in any local lore or children's legends? Hermione blinked, then frowned, as if trying to remember something said in a conversation from a fortnight prior that only barely registered. The Flying Keys were a pair of brothers who were famous pilots decades ago, she said, but I doubt that has any bearing here. Milo, to whom a pilot was someone who navigated a boat into or out of dangerous harbors in foul weather, was unable to fathom how they earned such a nickname. He chose, however, not to inform Hermione to this particular fact. Other than that, no, I've got nothing. However, we can probably assume the key was made to match the lock, correct? That depends. If the builder wanted to keep us out, the key would have no obvious identifying features whatsoever, and only be determinable by, say, a custom spell? No, scratch that. If he or she really wanted to keep everyone out, there wouldn't be a door. You don't build doors to keep people out. That's what walls are for. The door could be some sort of trick. Maybe it's a con, like a shell game. None of the keys fit. This room was created to delay intruders until a crack team of Aurors can arrive. Can't be, Hermione countered. Quirrell and Harry got through ahead of us, so there must be some way through. Maybe it's a test, she suggested. You can only pass if you can figure out the puzzle? But why? Milo asked. I see two possibilities. This dungeon is either some sort of test of worthiness, or it's designed to keep anyone out who doesn't know the trick to entering. In the first case, why bother? If they wanted to give the stone to someone worthy, Dumbledore and Flamel could just work together and pick someone, avoiding this hassle. In the second case, and it's designed for only a select group of people to enter, say Dumbledore, Flamel, maybe McGonagall, then why have any clues at all? Everyone in the group knows the trick. Anything and everything observable in the dungeon, therefore, is designed to throw intruders off the trail to it. It's just as likely that none of the keys work, and there's a secret password or a lever or a hidden door. My point still stands. Quirrell figured it out, remember? Unless... Milo used a dramatic pause as cover to reach into his belt. Gotcha! He shouted, flinging a handful of garlic powder directly behind him. Crap, he sighed. Let me guess. The corners of her lips twitched slightly. You assumed he was hiding under the effects of a disillusionment charm, waiting for us to open the door so he, being a dastardly villain, could follow us through? Maybe. But it was a perfectly reasonable guess, and if you say one word otherwise, please be reminded that I know where you live. There's one more thing we haven't considered, Hermione said slowly. Maybe Quirrell is one of this alleged group, and knows the trick. Crap. It made sense. Quirrell was the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor after all. If they were going to build a big dungeon to keep out dark wizards in their castle, who else would you ask for help? Of course Quirrell knew his way through this room. Blimey! Ron shouted from across the room. You'll never guess what I found! A secret door? Hermione asked. Treasure? Milo said at the same time. Neither! Ron said. 3 Comet 260s. Crap. Milo was still unable to get a broomstick to respond to his presence at all, and Hermione was hardly any better. A quick glance at Hermione's face revealed she didn't relish the thought of flight any more than he did. And they've been smashed to pieces, Ron added. Oh, thank God, Hermione said explosively, releasing a long-held breath. So what were you two talking about? Figure out what we're supposed to do yet? Ron asked. Milo said. Sort of. We determined the door is trapped and that none of the keys fit it, and that it's probably a fake and we have to beat a con man at a shell game or something. It got kind of complicated. So, I take it we're still clueless? Screw it. Kelgor's firebolt. An obsidian black shard of stone, glowing red with heat, burst from Milo's open palm and flew towards the door at just under the speed of sound, arcane energy crackling around it like a comet's tail. As soon as the tip of the cone touched the ancient oak door, it exploded into a searing red ball precisely 5 feet across, leaving their vision flecked with purple specks. The door splintered, and charred chunks of wood scattered about the room. Merlin's left foot! Ron cursed, rubbing at his eyes. Hermione stared at the door, her face a mask of abject terror. We are going to get in so much trouble, she quailed. Whatever, we'll do the paperwork, update our character sheets, and face the consequences of our actions later. Maybe. It's the adventurer's way. In the meantime, there's a dungeon to crawl. Ron cautiously poked a large chunk of X door with the remains of a Comet 260. The solid-looking wood crumbled into ash at the gentle contact, scattering in the gentle draft created by the fluttering wings above. Blimey, he said, almost reverently. Evocation is generally underpowered, Milo said, but on occasion it can have its uses. The next chamber was lit only by the glow of the room before entering through the smoldering doorway. Milo could barely make out large, towering armored figures with a vaguely humanoid shape standing in front of him, lined up like a phalanx. He took a hesitant step forward, and the instant that his foot touched the ground in this new room, his vision flooded white. His eyes took a few seconds to adjust to the vision in front of him. What Milo had taken to be armored soldiers were, instead, giant black chessmen, although as an experienced adventurer he refused to rule out the possibility that they were animated. They were carved to resemble armored soldiers, weapons and all, except for their faces. Some of the pieces wore helmets, but the rest had blank, expressionless smooth surfaces in their place. As someone who had never seen a mannequin before, he found the sight distinctly unnerving. I'm an idiot, Ron said quietly. Sorry, what? Milo asked. He was missing something. You'll see. I bet my magic that we have to play our way across. Before jumping to any conclusions, Hermione suggested, how about we test that? Wingardium Leviosa. She levitated a large chunk of door across the oversized chessboard. The black player seemed to ignore it, but as it reached the white line, a pale pawn leapt forwards at a diagonal and ran it through with his spear. Milo winced. He knew that stone weaponry took a -2 penalty to attack and damage, but looking at the razor-sharp edges of the nearby black soldier's gear, he doubted that applied here. The white pawn stepped back into its original position, looking no different than before, save for a light dusting of ash. Okay, Hermione admitted, we have to play our way across. Fortunately, Ron said with a slightly shaky grin, I have something of an advantage here. Why's that? Milo asked. Because you happen to put maximum ranks in profession chess player? And here I thought those were wasted. Just watch. Milo, do me a favor and take the place of the left bishop. That's the one with the pointy hat and mace. Hermione, take the third pawn from the right. But, Milo protested, just trust me. He is the best chess player in the school, remember? Hermione pointed out lightly. We had that tournament and everything. Still, she stepped into the place of the designated pawn. This does seem oddly specific. It suddenly struck Milo that he'd completely forgotten that chess was on the plot. Cursing himself, he reluctantly took the place of the bishop, who mutely stepped off the board to make way for him. Of course chess would come up here at the end. The sheer number of times it had been mentioned would be mind-bogglingly pointless had there not been some sort of chess-related puzzle. What about you? Hermione asked Ron. I'm the king, of course. Just do what I say, and we'll be fine, I promise. Reluctantly, Milo and Hermione agreed. After they had taken their places, a white pawn slid forward towards their side. Ron ordered one of his pawns forward, looking not quite as confident as he sounded. Milo noticed a somewhat wild look to his eyes, but after seeing the white side's response, another pawn, he let out a deep breath and smiled, as if the white side had fallen for some sort of trap. After that, Ron began to bellow orders at a shocking pace. He barely waited for each piece to finish moving before moving his next one. The white pieces, driven by silent orders, responded immediately to each move. Milo was surprised, to say the least. He knew Ron was good, but it was as if Ron were reading off of a script, knowing in advance what he would say each turn well before he spoke. The sheer amount of information he must be processing to give commands that quickly. Either Ron had been holding out on a headband of intellect plus 10, or he had no idea what he was doing and was simply giving orders at random. Milo swallowed nervously as it came time to act. Despite Ron's confidence, they were losing pieces. A lot of pieces. There were only 2 pawns aside from Hermione still standing on their side. They'd lost their other bishop early on to what had to have been a sheer blunder, though Ron's confident, almost bored expression never changed. Still, Ron was a better player than he had ever been. Milo walked diagonally across the board, standing uncomfortably close to a white knight. The knight completely ignored his presence, sitting atop his pale horse, long white blade in hand. Beard? Seriously? Okay. Long white blade in hand. While he was fully aware that the knight could only move in a weird L shape, suddenly the cleric's spell knight's move made a lot more sense to him. And that he was perfectly safe where he was standing, the sword still sent shivers down Milo's spine. The rules of chess were clear. When a piece took another piece, the taken piece didn't have a hope of fighting back, even a mighty queen against a lowly pawn. So Milo wondered what would happen if he was hit by that sword and survived. Would the knight simply repeatedly stab him until satisfied? Or would the game carry on, ignoring his presence completely as he bled out on the floor? Hermione, meanwhile, was tapping her foot impatiently. She'd been almost completely ignored by Ron, only moving up to allow another piece to pass early on. A black castle stepped up and smashed the white knight off his horse with a heavy, flanged mace. The knight's horse dragged its rider off the board, and then there was silence. "Check," Ron said quietly. Then he drew a deep breath, letting it out explosively. "Mate." The remaining white pieces, the ones that he could still stand anyway, walked to the edges of the board and bowed slightly. "How did you do that?" Hermione asked, throwing her arms around him in a hug. "That was incredible!" Milo was beginning to have suspicions at this point. Ron simply shrugged, looking a little embarrassed at Hermione's outcry. "I'd played the same game before." "You what?" Hermione asked, stepping back from him. Several pieces clicked in Milo's head so loudly he was surprised that nobody noticed. "When I played against Quirrell, I was really playing the castle." He used his little tournament to find out which of us were good at chess, Milo said with realization. That wily bastard! I knew chess had nothing to do with defense, Hermione exclaimed. Right. So every time I made a move, he'd go down here and make the same move against the castle, then use its move against me. Quirrell's likely rubbish at chess. But the white side's just a spell, Milo murmured. It doesn't have any creativity of its own, just an elaborate set of pre-made responses. So when you made the exact same moves against it, it made the same moves against me, Ron finished. It was the hardest game I've ever played, but I'd already done it, and I knew how it ended. You put all that together just by seeing the chess game down here, Hermione asked. Her eyes were a little wide. Milo was having to make some revisions in his mind as well. There might be more to Ron than he had previously thought. Chapter 30. Troll Wanted, Dead or Alive. Milo opened the door a crack and peeked through. The room was pitch dark, but his sense of smell confirmed his suspicions. Crap. He, ever so quietly, closed the door and looked back at his companions. Right, he whispered. So there's a troll on the other side of this door. His companion stared at him blankly for a few seconds, then cursed sulfurously. The same one as before? Ron asked after venting for a moment. If we're lucky, it'll be so scared of Hermione here that it'll lay down and play dead when we enter. Could be, Milo said, but I wouldn't count our lives on that. Frankly, I'm not sure we can take him. The last encounter he had with a troll had proved definitely, dreadfully, demonstratively disastrous. He looked at his comrades, whose faces were ashen. They'd thrown everything they'd had at it, and it had still gotten away. Hermione and he had been seriously injured. Wait, Ron said, his face brightening suddenly. Milo could just blast it like he did that door. Yeah, Milo said, about that. That was kind of a one-off. Sorry, guys. What else have we got? Maybe they should have tried to solve the last puzzle after all. The fickle being that ran the universe appeared to be punishing him for his brute force approach. If we had a large quantity of dust, I suppose I could use Ventus again, Hermione mused, but even that didn't finish off the last one. How about a hippogriff? Ron suggested, like back at the dueling club. That Hufflepuff was in the hospital wing for 3 days. Mind, I reckon he was just trying to skiv the classes. Didn't prepare summon monster, Milo admitted, but I have something that's almost as good for this. I only give it even odds of winning, though, so I suggest we run past it while it's distracted. Sound good? Not particularly, Hermione confessed, but I don't see that we have any other option. Great. So this spell takes 6 seconds to cast, so open the door for me at the count of 5, okay? Ron nodded and moved to stand by the heavy, iron-studded wooden door. Milo rolled up his sleeves, adjusted his Arcanist glove slightly, and began casting. Ron swallowed nervously, his hand on the doorknob. Summon skeletal troll! The door flew open, and a towering nightmare of a figure appeared before them. Without pausing to look closer, Milo and the others bolted through the door, an almost physical wall of putrid stench assaulting their noses. In the darkness, he heard someone gag, but kept running until he hit the far wall. Undead had dark vision out to 60 feet, so Milo wasn't worried about his summoned monster. If anything, the undead troll likely had the advantage over the living one in this lighting. Milo felt around at the wall that he was touching, searching for an exit. Then he encountered a problem. Where in the infinite layers of the abyss is this thrice-damned door? He hissed quietly. It was so dark that he could barely see the blue and gold of his own gloves. Lumos, Ron cast, and his wand glowed, clearly illuminating the door and them. No! Hermione shrieked, staring at the lit wand. She covered her mouth in horror, looking around nervously for the troll. Milo prepared to launch a salvo of magic at the troll that he was sure was about to fall on them like a landslide. Nevertheless, nothing happened. I thought you said there was a troll, Hermione whispered accusingly. I smelled a troll, Milo said. I just assumed there was one too. I mean, it makes sense, right? This dungeon was probably made by the top Hogwarts teachers, each one making a single room. Professor Sprout did the devil's snare probably, and Quirrell had this whole troll thing going on, so I figured... Found him, Ron said, the light of his wand revealing the unmistakable cadaver of an ex-troll. Big old bugger's dead already. Ready convenient, that is. Perhaps Quirrell killed him on the way in, Hermione suggested. Milo shrugged, dismissing his skeleton with a casual wave. Looks like. The next room simply had a large table with 7 mismatched bottles arranged on a thick tablecloth. As soon as they entered the room, purple flames appeared behind them, blocking their escape. Black flames guarded the door on the other side of the room. Bugger, Ron muttered. This has Snape written all over it. We should have brought shampoo. Any fire made by that git would probably bugger off and fright at one whiff of it. Look, Hermione said, pointing at a small roll of parchment on the table. Wingardium Leviosa. The roll floated over to her. Why not just pick it up? Milo asked. All this talk of traps must be making me paranoid, Hermione confessed. I felt I couldn't be too careful, especially if Professor Snape, she shot a look at Ron, had anything to do with it. You are learning, young grasshopper, Milo said sagely. I'm actually older than you are, Hermione pointed out. I'm 12, after all. You're only 11. Ish, Milo corrected. 11-ish. Birth date still unknown. Anyways, what's on the paper? It's a puzzle, she said, a smile growing on her face. One of the potions will let us through. I just need to figure out which. It's brilliant. A lot of wizards haven't got an ounce of logic. They'd be stuck in here forever. You don't say, Milo asked. So wanted magic wasn't intelligence-based after all. Interesting. Very interesting. The only catch is 3 of the bottles are poison, the rest are wine, except for one that lets the drinker go back, of course. So it's important I figure out which is which. Now just give me a second. Let's see. Hermione looked at each bottle closely and reread the parchment several times. I've got it. We drink from the little one, Ron said. We drink from the smallest one, Hermione finished. Oh, how did you figure? Quirrell must have drunk one when he went through earlier, Ron said. Harry too, for that matter. The small one is clean and the others all have dust on them. I see. But don't worry about it. A lot of the greatest wizards couldn't notice what's right under their noses either, Ron said teasingly. Interesting. It's not wisdom-based either. Could it be... Milo shuddered at the thought. Charisma? It would explain why Crabbe and Goyle were failing most of their courses, and why Voldemort was simultaneously the greatest dark wizard alive, or possibly undead, Milo thought, fingering a wooden stake in his belt, and had an impressive cult following. Dumbledore too, for that matter, except for the dark part. Fortunately, PCs were explicitly immune to the effects of high-powered diplomacy. We have a slight problem, Hermione said in a small voice. Oh? There's only enough for one of us, she said. Hardly even that. She was right. The bottle was tiny. Tiny, but full. The potion must replenish itself, Milo pointed out. Assuming Quirrell and Harry came through here, and everything we've seen suggests that they have, they both had to have drunk from that bottle, which is nevertheless full to the cork. So all we have to do is go through one at a time. The only question is, which order do we go in? Hermione asked. I was going to say how long does it take to refill, but yours is also valid. The only 2 questions are, which order do we go in, and how long does it take to refill? That and what's on the other side, and does it want to eat our faces? Ron added. Right. Our 3 questions are, which order do we go in, how long does it take to refill, and what's on the other side, and does it want to eat our faces? Oh, and how about, did Hermione pick the right bottle, or will the first drinker turn blue and die? So our 4 questions are, which order, how long, what's on the other side, And doesn't want to eat our faces off, Ron cut in. Right, and doesn't want to eat our faces off, and did Hermione pick the right bottle? Wait, Hermione said, didn't you say your robes made you fireproof? You had me set you on fire and everything. Fire resistant, Milo corrected in a pained voice, and it's only rated against regular fire. Against fancy black fire? It depends. How much does the DM hate me? The answer? Probably a lot. Milo could still remember the disastrous use spontaneous divination to get cleric spells fiasco. DM? Ron asked in a puzzled voice. Disgruntled mechanics. If you push the rules, sometimes the rules push back. Okay, let's pretend I never asked, and I'll pretend you're not completely daft. Fair enough. How about you two play fighter, rogue, wide-mouthed spiked pit trap to determine which of you goes first, and I'll chance the fire. The other one waits for the potion refill and charges in to save us from whatever horrific fate we found ourselves in. I'm thinking the giant squid that lives in the lake will figure in here somehow. I hesitate to ask, but fighter, rogue, wide-mouthed spiked pit trap? Hermione asked. Sure. The fighter power attacks the rogue for quintuple the rogue's HP. The rogue uses trap sense and discovers and disarms the wide-mouthed spiked pit trap. The fighter has no skill ranks or good abilities other than strength and constitution and falls into the wide-mouthed spiked pit trap. It's abstract, I know. For example, it assumes the theoretically possible, but in practice impossible, event of a fighter engaging a competent rogue in a fair combat. But really, when it comes down to it, it's just common sense. Oh, so just like rock, paper, scissors then, Hermione said. What is this rock, paper, scissors of which you speak? Well, rock bends the scissors cut the paper, and the paper, well, I guess it wraps around the rock, Ron explained. I'd always assumed the paper was too flexible to be beaten by the rock, Hermione said, which is why it wins. Psh, Milo muttered. The paper is probably a scroll of rock to mud. It's the only explanation that makes any sense. Regardless, Hermione cut in. Let's play, shall we? Milo, count us off. 3, 2, 1. Paper, Hermione said, at the same time that Ron said wide-mouthed spiked pit trap. Hoo boy, Milo muttered. Eventually, Ron won out with rock. I assumed you'd think I was the sort of person who always chose rock, so while I was going to trick you by choosing scissors, I realized you might have guessed that I'd use my cunning ploy and that I should really be using paper, but then I remembered your scores in History of Magic, so taking into account the fact that you are Brainiac, I one-upped you again, which put me right back to rock. Bloody brilliant, I say. Against Hermione's scissors. I assigned each move a number. Paper was 1, rock was 2, scissors was 3, and divided the third line of Snape's riddle by 3, because there are 3 of us. It came out to 4. It would wrap around and 1 would count as paper, of course, and 5 would be rock, to simulate a random move, which would thus be impossible to guess. Ha! Ron exclaimed. I win! Who's clever now? You were lucky, Hermione stressed. There's a difference. Just because you were right doesn't mean it was the smart decision. Right, Milo said. Drink up. Let's go rescue Harry. Ron's grin vanished immediately. Ah, bugger. I forgot the prize was almost certain grievous injury with a side of dismemberment. I should have lost. Who's clever now? Hermione muttered under her breath. Milo didn't think he was supposed to hear it. Milo walked over to the flickering black fire, feeling the heat rolling off of it. This was, oddly, reassuring. It was a peak implication that fire did, well, fire damage as opposed to something eviler like cold or negative energy. Or, Milo shuddered at the possibility, level drain. All things being equal, death was generally preferable to level loss. At least it was only a temporary inconvenience. Beside him, Ron chugged the tiny bottle and shivered. "It's like drinking ice water," he said, and passed the empty bottle to Hermione. "I'll follow as soon as it refills," she promised. "Be careful, will you? If your theory is right, and each of the heads of houses in Quirrell made a room, well, this was the last one. Good luck." She looked like she wanted to say more, but decided against it and stepped back. "Best take it on a run, you think?" Ron suggested. "Agreed. Ready?" Milo asked, backing up a bit so he could run through the fire. "Ready." And that is the end of chapter 30. Troll Wanted, Dead or Alive. So, let me know what you think. Has the stories been interesting to you so far? I will be letting everyone know on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter that next Friday is going to be our last Friday on this book. So that means I'm going to need a new fanfic to read. If you have a fanfic you would like to suggest, please put it in the comments or in the chat, or tweet it to me, send it to me as a DM, whatever you need to do. Email it to me, what have you. If you have a fanfic that you think that we should read, let me know. I would appreciate having other fanfics to read for Fan Fic Friday. Thank you all so much for being with me tonight. I really do appreciate it. And thank you also to our patrons, because your help makes all of the craziness in my life possible. If you would like to help support the channel, you could become a patron, and you can also help us by purchasing a jittery beverage over at Ko-fi. The links for those are in the about or the description below. So thank you again so much for being here. And remember, if people can hate for no reason, then we can love for no reason. So I love all of you. I honestly, truly do. And have a good rest of your night. Good night.